I am your host and moderator, Matthew Lee. I work with the IGD Serious Games SIG. I also lecture at California State University Long Beach. I work with games research. I've been a community manager in the past, done some game design. But the people you're probably really here to see are the rest of my glorious panel. I'll give a few minutes for introductions, starting off with Charlie Hubbard.
Hi, that's me. I'm Scottish, so if you don't understand me, that's your problem. Thank you. We are a good country. So I'm Director of Partnerships for Global Game Jam. I'm a cultural sensitivity expert, so I'm working on a couple of games. One's AAA, but I'm not allowed to talk about it. I'm a PhD researcher using gamescapes to preserve Indigenous languages, cultures, and traditions. I founded a Scottish cultural heritage game jam based on Gaelic, which is a language that history happened and we weren't allowed to use our language anymore. So it's sadly dying out. So it's to bring back Scottish culture and an interest in Scottish language. So I'm a culturalization, localization expert. I started in game industry 20 years ago. So when I was 2.
And a shark enthusiast, apparently?
Yeah, straight out of the womb, coding. But I started off in China doing localization Chinese, simplified traditional to English and vice versa. And I love sharks. And I've done shark cage diving for quite a long time. And I almost had my foot bitten off by a great white. So,
Oh.
go.
And I think you had a few takeaways from this.
Yeah, so the takeaways that I would be hoping to give you by the end of this is, value your community and make sure you involve them. So there's a phrase, nothing about us without us. So for example, my culture, if you're making a game about Scottish people, actually have some Scottish people involved in that. Or this is for any kind of culture, sexuality, gender, whatever. Always have someone from there and value your community and help them, allow them to make the decisions or advise you. Representation is key. So give spaces for diverse and marginalized voices to be heard. The power and responsibility that we have in game industry to correctly represent people. I've seen people brought to tears because they've seen themselves positively represented. Good tears though. And make sure you're doing it for the right reasons. Not tick boxing. Don't say, oh, we need to have a queer character because therefore we can tick that little box. Do that, but have it for the right reasons. So that's my takeaways.
Thank you, Charlie. Elizabeth?
Hi, everybody. My name is Dr. Elizabeth Kilmer. I am a clinical psychologist and also a qualitative researcher with the nonprofit organization Take This. Take This is the oldest nonprofit organization to form serving mental health in both the games community as well as the games industry. We do a bunch of workshops. If you've ever been to a PAX or a couple of other conventions and you've seen the AFK room, which is intentionally the most boring room in the convention to get some space away and relax. We also do a lot of consulting around how to promote community resilience and reduce hate, harassment, and extremism in gaming spaces. My background around games actually started from a professional standpoint in the kind of clinical psych space. So I have done a lot of application of popular games like D&D and Minecraft to help support both like individual therapeutic goals as well as community goals. If you're interested in learning more about that piece, I do have a book on using tabletop role-playing games in therapy in the GDC bookstore, which is really exciting.
I believe you had a takeaway as well?
Yeah. So my takeaway for what I'm assuming we're going to talk about in this panel that hasn't happened yet. So I may have more thoughts later for sure. But one of the themes that we really run into is thinking about planning for community resilience, planning for prosociality is something that needs to start really early on. The later you wait, the longer you wait, just like when we're thinking about adding in accessibility features, the more expensive it gets and the harder it gets and the more it feels like a chore instead of a really exciting opportunity for collaboration and brainstorming.
And I'm pretty sure you really have quantified how much that can cost, right?
We do have some numbers on how it gets expensive, yes.
Looking forward to that. All right, Tim, let me go play your video.
Yeah, go for it. I'm Tim Nixon. I'm the director of online experience at that game company. And this is just a 1-minute video of our game Sky. Is the sound going through?
Was going to.
It's not meant to come through, so I can talk over it.
Technical difficulties,
It's
right?
okay, as long as I can talk at the same time.
There we go.
Brilliant, thanks so much. So Sky is, in many ways, a spiritual successor to the game Journey, beloved indie classic. And the genesis of that game was really our creative director, Genova, his dream to bring the core story arc and all the wholesome, beautiful elements of gameplay from that game out to a broader audience. So we made it free to play, we went onto mobile platforms, and we enhanced many of the multiplayer aspects of the game. And even though it has a core story arc, just like Journey did, really a lot of players that come into the game, they're drawn in by the original, the story and the narrative, but they really stay and hang out in that more just like a chat app. And in fact, we get more chat messages in the game per day than many apps like WhatsApp and Facebook. So players are making friendships, they're investing in one another, literally spending the currency they collect to build those friendships and level up with abilities like high fives and piggybacks and hugs and all this sort of stuff. So it's very wholesome sort of gameplay. And they can learn to play instruments together, play mini games, all this sort of stuff. So we have around 250 million players around the world now, predominantly in China, Japan, and Southeast Asia, but we have a big audience now in the USA and Latin America as well. And they're predominantly young women. So we take the job of protecting them incredibly seriously. So a little bit about me. I've been working on mobile free-to-play games for about 15 years now, 7 years on Sky, and then 8 years working at Runaway as a founder and director on games like Flutter and Splash. And yeah, the takeaways that I wanted to focus on at some point today, firstly is that something that a lot of other people have already said, which is trying to be the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff with moderation is just sort of like really not going to work. If you're trying to create a pro-social environment. And you need to lead with a fundamental reason for being in your company and your product, which inspires these sort of pro-social environments. So at TGC, that's something like one of our core values is that we exist to create positive emotional experiences. So if we find something that might be creating a lot of engagement or money or some other KPI outcome, but we know it's not creating a positive emotional outcome, then we need to change that and rally around that value again. And we also have those values specifically for the gameplay mechanics. So one other example might be the user-generated content in our game. We always lead with the emotional goal, which in that case is to feel players' heart and soul everywhere. And so we sort of ask ourselves, in every rotation, is that what the feature is doing? Before we look at anything like a number of like how many people are using it or is it making us money, we lead with that emotional feeling. So that's the first one. And it's kind of related to what I was just saying about the metrics. When looking at the success of any of these sorts of features, it's super important to not be like reactive to an individual community member or like an individual survey or one piece of data. We've done a lot of work to try and collect in parallel a full spectrum of player feeling from data, quantitative, through to more qualitative. How does the team feel about this? How do individual players feel about it and talking to them? And that's probably enough for me for now.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely understanding the entire context of the play experience is really important, and we're looking forward to your contribution on this. Attila, I think you're next.
My name is Attila Sander. I'm the CEO and co-founder of a tiny Swiss company called Massively Multiplayer Online Science. It's so tiny that the whole company is sitting in front of you right now. But we managed to pull off some rather large projects. We're working in a very specific field. We're connecting science with games, more specifically citizen science, where we involve the general public or the public into the scientific process. And so we created, together with our partners, CCP and Gearbox, these two major, massive projects in citizen science that manifested in mini games inside these big virtual worlds. And when players are playing with these mini games, they're actually working on real-life scientific data and analyzing real-life scientific problems. So my takeaways are quite trivial. The first one I wanted to mention it's about innovation is because I think it's deeply rooted in the DNA of the industry. But in the meantime, we kind of see that if you reach a certain level of success and size, there's a lot of pressure mounting to keep to things which seem to working, and that is somewhat counter to innovation. The second takeaway, I could rephrase it in a way, and that's very important for us as we're working with existing games with a long history usually, is that no matter how important I think my project, my goals, my initiative is, that doesn't justify to turn everything upside down. And so I think the proper course of action is to approach existing success and achievements with a massive amount of humility. And then the third one is something like build things which players play because they want to play with it.
Yeah, definitely. Choice, as we found out, is really important. If players don't choose to do good things and you try to make them do that can be counterproductive in the long run. And last but certainly not least, Kim.
Hello, everyone. I was sitting here trying to remember what I put on this slide, so I'm just going to refer to my left here really quickly. I'm Kimberly Voll. It's lovely to meet you and re-meet you all. I know a lot of us have been hanging out all day in this room, and it's been amazing. I feel like we're all the best of friends now. So thank you for journeying with us today. And for those of you who are newly arrived, thank you for choosing this way to wrap up your GDC today, first day. So my background, I wear kind of two key hats. So my day job is CEO of Brace Yourself Games. We're a small indie studio up in Vancouver, Canada, where I'm originally from. I also co-founded and helped run the Fair Play Alliance, which I won't bore you with the details. If you're here, you probably know a little bit about us, but I will just say very briefly, we are a cross-industry initiative that focuses on reducing hate and harassment and creating experiences that are more conducive to the kinds of values and outcomes that we want to see on behalf of players. And many of you here today, you or your companies are members, so thank you so much for your support. For myself, I focus on a lot of different things. I tossed a couple things there up on the slides. But I do really think a lot about game design from a social perspective, from a digital thriving perspective, from a player dynamics perspective. You know, how do we come to gaming experiences as ourselves? What does that mean when we meet others who are also arriving as themselves? How do we actually design things in a way, as I mentioned, the intent of the FPA, how do we design things in a way that are conducive to outcomes? I think we have a lot of both opportunities and responsibilities as game developers to do things differently. I also think and work a lot around the idea of operationalizing DEI and our values. You know, at the end of the day, I think that the products that we create are a reflection of the companies that we construct and how we hold ourselves accountable to those values. So what does that really mean in practice, to take those values and really fold them throughout a company and then use that to direct and inform the products that we make? Well, that's a lot of what I help support companies with. So I do a lot of consulting across the industry, helping with that. I didn't do my homework, and I don't have a takeaway slide, so I'm going to give you a couple takeaways, and you can hold me accountable to them at the end. How's that? The first one is just actually putting on my FPA hat, which is a little bit more of an announcement/reminder. For those of you who might not know, after this event, we do have a mixer that anyone is available or is welcome to attend. Pardon me. Hopefully you're available. You don't have to come. No pressure. It's at Tequila Mockingbird, which is just a couple blocks from here. So if you're interested in forming a contingent and wandering over en masse, find me. We will do so. The other takeaway, perhaps a bit more relevant to this session, is just that I really think when we discuss, and we're going to dig into what digital thriving is, when we discuss topics around digital thriving and these outcomes, I want people to feel a greater sense of accessibility to making a difference. There's a lot in this world that might make us feel differently from time to time. Certain recent events, for example, have made things, I think, sometimes feel especially oppressive. But you being here, being a part of this, asking the question of what I can do differently, these are the steps to change. And not only are we taking steps to change, we are changing. We are making a difference. The outcomes that we're seeing in games today, the breadth and depth of design tooling that we are co-developing, that we are co-creating, these are creating very meaningful differences in the games. And we've got a long way to go, sure, but like look around this room, like we are doing this together, and there are many more people that are not represented in this room. So my takeaway is just to take a spot of hope from this, that I think we are doing good work, you all are doing good work, and we are ultimately in this together.
Very inspiring. Thank you. I think it's about time that we just jump headlong in with some of our first questions. And where better to start than what is digital thriving? I mean, it's on the title of the panel, right? So I'm sure you all have some ideas about it that you'd like to share. Whoever would like to start.
I can go first. I feel partially responsible for the term, so. Yeah, so I mean, digital thriving, it might bring to mind certain things for you, but I would say for me, I think there's a lot of different ways you could look at it, but for me, what it really means is this designing with an outcome to help people not just bring their full selves to experiences, but to feel safe and secure, to have deep feelings of accomplishment and community and relatedness, to feel actualized in these spaces versus shut down or having to be someone that you're not. So like, what does it mean to come to a digital space? And let's face it, pretty much we're here because of gaming spaces specifically. So what does it mean to come to a game and come away from that experience enriched because of the time you spent there, both in the game and with the people that were present?
Absolutely. Absolutely, but also I've got two microphones and I can't decide which one I like best. To be valued and to know that your voice is heard and you are represented, and like you said, with that safe space, but to be valued is so, so important, because people won't actively engage in a community if their voice isn't heard, if they're not valued, if they just feel that it doesn't really matter what I say because no one's really going to pay attention. So making those safe spaces and allowing other voices to be heard, but also amplifying voices where you know that maybe someone's a little too nervous to speak, you can give them a gentle push, not a big one, but a gentle push to say, well, by the way, what's your thoughts on that? So bringing people in and making it all more inclusive.
And if I may interject, I think this has become much more important since the pandemic, because with the pandemic, with everyone coming online to these new spaces, we've had a lot more people entering these places, and these online spaces being used as a place where people deal with social isolation. So if we don't create good community spaces for them, they may not have another place to go.
I don't have anything to add to the definition of digital thriving. I think that's been phenomenally captured. But I want to point out one of the reasons why I love this term so much, because it's not setting up this like bare minimum threshold of like, oh, this is a community that's not toxic. Oh, this is a community that's like not harmful. Oh, this is a community that's like generally positive. Instead, it implies that this is a space in which we have the opportunity to grow, we have the opportunity to connect, we have the opportunity to really engage in like the best and most interesting parts of ourselves and get really excited and get really creative with other people. So I like that it sets up this thing that we are reaching towards, as opposed to this like kind of bare minimum that we're trying to avoid falling below.
Yes, definitely. And it's definitely really interesting that the term thriving is also used in positive psychology as in terms of positive mental health, as the contrast to negative mental health and mental disorders. It's like, if you want to talk about disease, that's one thing, but you want to talk about healthy. You want to talk about how you have room to grow, and I think that's really important.
Yeah, I love the word enriching, that's great. I like to think about nourishing, like each session or each day being something that, I know this is a bit trite, but like, leaves you feeling better than when you started. And ultimately, I like to think about like, if you reflect back on the time that you spent in this game, we think that that was like your life well spent. And, enriching. Yeah.
Cool. Out of curiosity, do we know, like, what do we currently know about how people already engage in these spaces, about the sorts of behaviors and stuff they engage in? Any particular patterns that lead to thriving that you know of?
Should I go first again?
You can start with, say, Tim, for example.
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Any behaviors or strategies that people are already doing that lead to digital thriving, out of curiosity, if you've seen any?
Sure. Well, this is kind of related to the point I was saying at the start, where having a deep awareness for what's happening in your actual player's experience is absolutely key, because no matter how much you might think a design works well on paper, I can guarantee you it's not going to pan out the way you think it is in a live community environment. And Dan was talking about this in the talk before. But when you get into massively multiplayer games, especially when you've got so many different individual actors that can act in so many different crazy ways, it's just impossible to predict how they will use the tools that you give them, even the tools that are designed with the best of intentions. So I was saying before, leading with values is great, but ultimately what you're going to use those values is to help you course correct when things inevitably go wrong. And the beauty of online games, my favorite part of online games is after they're out. Before you launch them, you're in this no man's land of self, doubt and I don't know if people are going to like this, or how they're going to react to it. But once you're live, you can start changing things and adjusting them to get the outcomes that you want. And then from there, it's a matter of trying to not be immediately reactive. Like if, say, an individual community member comes to you and says, "I'm having a really bad time, you've got to fix this particular thing." Actually just pausing there and being like, okay, understanding their experience and then saying, how is this common? Do we see this from more people? Try to quantify it, talk to some more players, get a full 3D picture, in Player Insights, it's got triangulation, getting a full picture of how it's actually being perceived, and then adjusting from there and being brave enough to adjust. And ultimately, and maybe this sounds obvious, but playing the game yourself, I think it's so crucial, and actually understanding how it makes you feel. Do you want to load it today? Do you feel better after playing it? And maybe that seems obvious, but a lot of, it's not obvious to a lot of people actually. And if we're talking about something which is threaded into our day-to-day lives, then dog fooding it is so important, because if you don't want to pick it up, then you shouldn't expect someone else to.
Right. Attila, you have any insights on this?
Yeah, so I wanted to add another aspect of digital thriving, which I think all of us deeply desires to do things which are meaningful. And I think it's not necessarily obvious to create meaningful experiences in video games and digital experiences. And now with these projects, with Project Discovery and Borderland Science, we kind of prove that it's really possible to involve real-life, meaningful experiences in a game while not breaking immersion and while not even denting the experience of players. We've also seen really interesting changes in behavior who participated in these projects. So one of the interesting side effects of one of the projects was that people started to role play as scientists in the game. That was really interesting to see.
Yeah, and I think another aspect of how we've seen digital thriving happen is within communities. So now you've got a lot of games, usually indie developers, who are the best. So that's my personal opinion, not global game jams. They are going to community and building a community first before they've even released the game. They're using the community to create this holistic ecosystem where they're getting feedback, they're engaging with that community. What do you think about the art style? What do you think about this game core loop? And having that sense of ownership for the community. And I would say that's digital thriving within the community basis. And if it's done right and not just for marketing, it can be a wonderful thing. To have that sense of ownership of, oh, that bit of the game, I commented on that or I helped shape that is really important as well.
Yeah, I think one of the really Elizabeth nailed it earlier when she was talking about the aspirational aspects of digital thriving. And I think a huge piece of what we're trying to do is really reframe the conversation away from that bare minimum of wrist slapping and really ask ourselves, what does good look like? And I think we're at a really interesting juncture because we are discovering this language. We are discovering these markers. We have a lot of evidence of human thriving, right? We've got a long, rich history of psychology and sociology and so forth that has taught us a lot about what it means to thrive as a human being. You know, we heard earlier today, Dan talking about us as social creatures and the needs that we have to socialize and so on. So I think a lot of what we're trying to figure out are how do we think about, how do we characterize these markers of digital thriving? And I think there's three lenses that are really important to consider. I think we often refer to it as CGI, so community, group, and individual. So at the individual level, what does it mean to see thriving in a digital context? You know, how is that individual doing? How are they able to show up in game spaces or in the context of group settings and so on and so forth? And is that a healthful experience for them? And what are they bringing to that situation that is influencing the outcomes or the success of that experience? The group level, it's of course, it's smaller, it's more, but it's interfacing with other people. So what is your success rate of interfacing with other people? How are you able to collaborate, cooperate, work with others in those contexts? Do you have the tools and techniques for conflict resolution, so on and so forth? Are you putting a helping hand out there? Are you mentoring? Are you helping others? There are certain behavior patterns for which they're generally indicative of a community doing well. You know, do vulnerable people feel comfortable and safe enough to have a reasonable degree of disclosure or to put themselves out there and help others? And then, of course, at the community level, you're zooming way out and you're looking at the percentage of these behaviors on the whole. You can also look at the social network aspects. So, you know, what is the density of the social network? Not everyone's going to be best friends with everyone, spoiler alert, but you should see certain markers within those networks that are indicative of healthy connections and certain healthy clusters. Those can be problematic too, but you'll want to see some. So I think we're at this really interesting cusp of really starting to take these things, you know, take the show on the road, take these techniques, learn how to develop in a way that allows us to measure for these markers rather than perhaps what we have been doing historically, which is just looking for the markers of harm or disruption. Also important, don't stop doing that. We have a responsibility, but we're trying to layer on top of this a much more aspirational goal that has the outcome of digital thriving.
Thank you. Is there anything to add?
Yeah, the final piece I want to add, just to build off of what Kim was saying around kind of the social connections and growth. In psychology, one of the biggest markers we see, both for mental health and physical health outcomes across the lifespan, is perceived social support and connections. It doesn't actually matter if you have friends. If you believe you have friends, like that is what is the really important piece. And so thinking about ways in which we can better understand and facilitate that community building and also be able to check in with players about how heard they feel, how validated they feel, how connected they feel, how supported they feel by other players can really help us understand if we are moving in that direction of digital thriving.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I think we're essentially moving to the second topic of conversation generally. Like, what kind of information do we need to operationalize digital thriving? I think we've done a pretty good job defining it and exploring some of the dimensions of it, but also going over some of the basic markers of it. But are there any things that data we might already have, or is there any data that we might need?
Me.
Okay.
Okay, but I really want to hear from everyone else on this because this is an amazing group of people with a lot of background in this stuff. So I'll just say really quickly, whenever I think of operationalizing this stuff, I always fall back to the concept of operationalizing your values. So really, I talked about that a little bit in the quick intro, but I think asking yourself, do you know what your values are? And I don't just mean, you know, integrity or, you know, those are all nice, warm and cozy thoughts, but they don't really hold up to any kind of interrogation. You know, when the stuff hits the fan, integrity as a word is not going to give you a very good plan or framework for what to do. So being able to take those ideas and really drill down and say, okay, well, if integrity is important to me, how how does that manifest? How does that affect how I show up to work? How does that affect how I hold others accountable to how they show up to work or to the products that we make? In what ways are those values actually being realized, I think is a really key thing. Because at the end of the day, you know, I always think of it like we're building sandwiches in a manner of speaking, right? We have, for some of us, that sandwich is very thin. We're a tiny little company and we're all kind of involved in everything. But for bigger companies, that sandwich can be more pronounced. I don't want to pronounce sandwiches. What a weird thing to say. It's the end of the day. It's been a long day. But you've got to have both the those at the IC or the individual contributor level, those with the sleeves up really doing the design work, they need to be empowered to be able to do the work, to be able to actually bring those values to the product. But if at the top part of the sandwich, bear with me here, if at the top you don't have an accountability structure, if you're not actually evaluating those outcomes relative to digital thriving, then guess what? You're not necessarily aligning those motivations, and you're going to end up with a bunch of anti-patterns in your actual design work. So operationalizing values is really asking the hard questions of what are our values, how do we bring them to work, and what do we expect to see down the line in our products that are consistent with those values, and then holding yourself accountable and interrogating that entire end-to-end journey to look for underminers and opportunities to shore those up and show your team that not only do you support them in this, but that you are creating structures and holding space for these values to matter.
Kim, I love that you're talking about values because we have a workshop specifically focused on like helping people actually operationalize.
Totally teeing that up. Go to that workshop.
Thank you so much. Because that's a thing both in like the business space but also in the therapy space, is we talk a lot about values, right? Like that's a really big buzzwordy thing. But that doesn't actually tell you where you're going, right? We think about values as these like cardinal directions. You're going north, you're going east. You don't ever like arrive at north, right? Like you can kind of keep going. Just like you don't wake up one morning and be like, well, I've been really good at being honest. I'm done being honest. I've achieved honesty. Don't need to do that anymore. And when we're thinking about digital thriving, it's the same kind of idea, right? Like we need to think about what are our specific goals. Okay, I'm going east. One of my goals might be to go to Boston. Okay, how do I get to Boston? Am I going to fly? Am I going to take a train? Probably not in the United States. Am I going to drive? What is that going to look like? How long is it going to take me? What are the kinds of pieces that I need? So you can start with these really lofty, broad goals and then continue to narrow them down. In the Fair Play workshop this morning, there was a really nice exercise that we did looking at kind of markers of success or markers of risk. So what are the kinds of behaviors we might see from our players that would indicate that we are moving towards these goals that we have set around digital thriving? Are we seeing greater incidents of hate and harassment? Are we seeing seemingly the same amount of hate and harassment, but we're now seeing more people reporting that hate and harassment? People think that like their reports actually matter. Are we seeing players that are starting to kind of self-enforce some of these positive norms that we've tried to get started in the community? So both operationalizing the goals that we may have around digital thriving, but also thinking about what are those markers that we can use to figure out if we are getting closer or farther from those goals we've set.
Very cool. Thank you. Tim, I'm going to pick on you because...
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So I just want to back up what these two just said in that if you have a value statement, it should be like totally unambiguous and testable, right? And then what I mean by that is that you should be able to ask yourself whether it is true, and you should be able to have a clear answer or not. And so, to this point about, we have integrity. It's like, it's very ambiguous, like, from different perspectives. People would be able to answer that differently. But just to use one of the examples I pulled out before with our user-generated content, we have this, and this is probably one of the ones that worked the best, and we're still figuring this out ourselves. Some of our statements are better than others, but this one worked great. Like, we can feel the player's heart and soul everywhere. That's the point of UGC existing in Sky. And so before we look at any numbers or like community feedback, we ask ourselves that. Do we feel that as we walk through the world? And I was really struck by the look on the face of the product owner of like the UGC when like we asked this for the first time, and I was like, oh my God, I knew that it was clear because we didn't feel that. We knew that a lot of it was just kind of junk. And so that was the beginning of a conversation where we could actually say, okay, well, if we know in our heart that this is not true, that we're not living up to our values, what information can we go and get about the experience which will help us understand why? And then that sets the stage for us to be able to talk to the players, to study all the data and understand, like, okay, who's using this? How are they using it? What stories are they telling? How are people feeling about it? Like what are they using it for? And then we can bring all of that back to the designers, and we can use that to help paint a really clear picture about how it's actually working, so that then they can act and move closer to that inspiring statement that they've set for themselves at the start. So yeah, I think that would be my main piece of advice, is like, can you test it? Can you ask yourself that and unambiguously answer whether something is true or not?
Very nice. Thank you. Anything to add?
Sorry.
We touched hands.
All right, either of you?
Go you on.
So I wanted to refer back to Charlie's previous comments about involving gamers in the process. When we started our work with CCP, with EVE Online, it was really interesting because when we proposed this project for them, they fell in love with it immediately, but also it was something which nobody had ever done it before, so there are certain risks involved. And back then it was Andy Norgran, who was the executive producer of EVE Online, and she told me that she has to justify the project primarily for the player base, why she's allocating precious resources on something which is nowhere on the wish list of players. And I think CCP's approach was exemplary, how they involved the community into building a new feature. So much so that the first time we talked about this to players, that was as FanFest, which is the annual player convention in Reykjavik. If I remember well, some 300 players showed up for the presentation where we only talked about the concept. We had no idea what kind of research we want to put in the game, how it will be manifested. We just had a high-level idea, and we presented it together with the game design director, and it was very well received. And then we started to work on a prototype. We also involved Reykjavik University, so students came on board, which meant that we used less of the internal developer resources to get to a prototype. And by the time we get to the point where we release this feature in the game, the community already accepted and embraced it. And it's not just that they were happy that it's in the game, but they broke all records in citizen science with it.
Yeah. So yeah, I think going back to what you said about values, that it's also worth bearing in mind that the person you think you are doesn't actually exist. Everyone else has a different vision of you. So you can say, I'm very kind, I'm very this, but if other people's perception isn't that, then you're not. And so I was in a conversation with someone who had said some really quite upsetting things to the team that I was representing at the time. And they said, no, I never meant to be, it wasn't supposed to be taken that way. So when we're putting something out there, you need to, yes, you need to have your values, and you do need to be able to demonstrate them, but it's how do people perceive you? Do they perceive you for having those values? Is that something that someone else would say, yes, actually, really generous boss, or a kind person? So it's bearing in mind other people's perceptions as well. It's very easy to say, I'm going to be this, or I am that, but you might not be.
Thank you very much. One of the things a number of you touched on during what you mentioned was, in addition to the role of involving the community and looking at assessing values, that design was important as well. Do any of you have any further comments about the role of design in designing to encourage digital thriving? What role does that play?
I mean, like, fundamentally, the mechanics of your game are going to dictate the type of behavior that you have between your players. I can speak to a couple of things we did in Sky, although, like, our creative director, Geneva's doing a talk tomorrow at 5:30, which is all about this. So if you're interested in the design of prosocial behavior and gameplay mechanics, then that's the talk to go to. But just one example, in our game, like I said at the start, it was incredibly important for us to create a safe space where people were protected and they weren't going to be hounded, and protect, like, the elegance as well of the aesthetic of the game. So we do have chat in the game, but you have to consent both ways before anybody can chat together. And in fact, you actually have to invest some of your hard-earned currency to be able to unlock chat. So getting there is actually quite, difficult, on purpose. And it creates a very special moment in the game as well, when you are vulnerable enough to go through that set of interactions with somebody, and then to also invest part of your hard-earned currency in unlocking the ability to text back and forth with somebody. So that's just one example. And another thing that we decided pretty early on is that there would be no private spaces in Sky. Every space is public. So even with a new player apartment, UGC space that we've got now, anyone can just wander in at any time. So we've got these little places where you can chat and hang out, but to essentially make it so that people can't, hopefully to dissuade predators, then it all feels like it's a fluid space where everyone is welcome.
Okay. Kim, I'm sure you have a few things to say about this.
Well, hi, everybody. I did want Tim to go first because they do amazing work. Yeah, I mean, just building on everything that Tim said was amazing. Just building on that, I think I've come to refer to video games more as social infrastructure in recent years because of the role that they play for us as a society. And when you think about social infrastructure, it needs to provide a framework and a system for social accountability and so forth. It essentially is helping facilitate us get along together as a society. It has that structural role in teeing that up and providing the services and frameworks for us to interface. But when you take a look at digital spaces and you take a look at gaming spaces, a lot of that is missing. We've not treated our responsibility as game developers in line with thinking of it as social responsibility. And that's not calling anyone out, right? Back in the day, video games were something you took off the shelf, you played with them, and you put them back. They were essentially a goods, right? They were a toy, and we treated them as such, and our sense of responsibility was commensurate with that. But today we are building huge online spaces where people, they go there to spend time in the same way that we're all spending time in this space right now. And whether we want to acknowledge it or not, that comes with a greater responsibility. We are constructing social responsibility. And the reality of these spaces is, we're sitting here, we are communicating so much information with each other. Never mind that I'm up here yammering on. We've got our body language, we've got all of the different ways in which we are dressing to represent how we want to be seen. There's so many. It's such a rich space. And we're all here around this same shared conceit of we're at GDC, we're at a conference. That means we do certain things. And we have all of these little micro ways in which we are slowly but surely developing a little bit more trust with one another. We are all, I don't know if you know this, we're all having a shared experience right now. And if we go to a session tomorrow, and maybe I've never spoken to you before, but we were here, and I'm like, we just leveled up our trust a little bit. So all of this rich space that we are sitting in, all of these things that are coming to bear on our ability to feel safe and secure in this space and how we represent ourselves, most of that's not there in a video game, right? It is a far, cry from what this is. We have much reduced channels of communication. We have much reduced, if largely absent, ways of representing ourselves within gaming spaces. We are thrusting together people from different backgrounds and cultures, which is wonderful. We should celebrate that. What a cool thing video games do. But it turns out we're not naturally tolerant of those that are different than us. We need to work at facilitating that. As much as we may wish we were, and many of us, I think, have come to be that, it is very hard for humans. We relate to people we're more similar to because there's a shared connection. But as game designers, that's what we do. We facilitate experiences. We can design these experiences in a meaningful way when we're thoughtful of the places of friction that arise or where people may struggle to relate to one another. And we can swoop in and we can usher in, or we can shepherd those experiences a little bit more. We can facilitate them a little bit more intentionally to make sure that players are having more successful interactions. And those successful interactions over time then allow us to build more trust, and they allow the interactions that we're seeing to be more positive, which generates more positive atmosphere. and we are, of course, a product of our environments. So there's a lot that we are doing when we think about it from the perspective of social infrastructure and the responsibilities therein, and then we combine that with our skills as game developers, then I think there's a huge, huge, rich opportunity space from the design perspective.
When you mentioned the term social infrastructure, that really kind of brings into focus how important this topic is, because infrastructure is really critical for a huge number of things. One, I guess we can say, which I guess leads into like, okay, so we kind of know why it's important, but what are the consequences of not doing this? I think, Liz, you might have something?
So many thoughts on this. So when we fail to build effective infrastructure in online social spaces and games, just like in the real world, like what happens if your road is full of potholes? What happens if your streetlights don't work, right? Like we can get along and we can keep moving and we can drive around the potholes as much as we possibly can until, road fixing season happens, but there's still a space in which that's going to make it much harder for people to get where they're going. It's going to make it much harder for people to interact. It's also going to make people exhausted and grumpy and frustrated. Has anybody ever gotten into like a fight with a friend or a partner or a loved one?
Never.
I'm not seeing nearly enough raised hands right now. How many of you have had those fights at higher instances when you happen to be hungry or tired or frustrated, right? You might generally think like, oh, I'm good at getting along with other people. And then you haven't eaten in like 6 hours and you just heard that it's going to be another an hour and a half before you get to eat. And someone says something that normally wouldn't bother you very much. And now you are so mad. The same kind of thing can happen when we're in gaming spaces and we might already have struggles with emotional regulation because we haven't slept all week or because there's really scary stuff happening in the news or because we're 13 years old. And being a 13-year-old is a big challenge for emotional regulation. And if we're in this gaming space and it makes it much harder for us to stay regulated, it makes it much harder for us to stay calm, we're not going to be kind people. We're not going to do a good job of interacting. But if we have a space where we're able to reduce the friction, where we're able to normalize more of these prosocial behaviors, games are an amazing way to build shared experiences. I'm sure everyone in this room has memories of times where you were playing with friends who might not have even been in the same room as you, but it felt like they were so much more than when you were on a Zoom call or watching a movie together. So games can create these amazing spaces, but we need them to be like roads that function as opposed to those that are full of potholes.
So an important takeaway is that eat before you play.
And just like games have an amazing power to do good, that power can also be used for not so good purposes, I'm sure.
Yeah, that's true. So, wasn't super going to get into this in this panel, but I'll say my like cautionary tale piece. So, games are amazing spaces, right? To build communities, to learn about ourselves, to connect with other people all around the world, to connect with people who have different experiences than our own. Even the anonymity of games can be really powerful if we get the opportunity to try on new experiences. We get to try out stuff about our own identity that we're not necessarily comfortable with. But because of that, games can often be leveraged by bad actors. So people that are looking to recruit to radical organizations or people that are looking to exploit children. So it is important that as we're thinking about building these really amazing communities where people get along really well, that we also are mindful of and put in safeguards around people who might want to exploit those same pieces.
Does anyone else have anything to add on this?
Yeah, so it's I think, building on what you just said there, that it's a case of being proactive, not reactive. So having things in place that if something happens, if the worst happens and your community turns into a dumpster fire or something like that, have steps in place to deal with the bad actor, have things in place that are going to help you ameliorate that situation in a way that is going to cause as little drama as possible. Like, because these things can just build and build and build. But the reason I say proactive is because if you're reacting to something that has happened, it's already too late. You should understand that perhaps there might be people that don't like diversity in games, and they're just waiting to be angry about something. And that's given them an opportunity to have things in place ready for that. And hopefully you never need to use them.
Yeah. I would normally ask whether there are any groups particularly vulnerable to failure to build resilient communities, but I think we've been seeing some of that in the last few. Yeah. So in terms of what's been done, we've gone into that a bit. Like Attila and Tim have definitely talked about some of their efforts. Kim has gone into some stuff as well, I think. But are there any benefits that these efforts have brought to developers, communities, the companies?
Absolutely. So my son is 24 years old. He was in lockdown in my house, wouldn't leave. And online gaming saved his sanity and also my sanity as well. There were people that were using, so originally it was like LOL, Dota, and he would go in and it would be like, hey, how are you? And they'd chat with each other. But over that 2 years in Scotland of lockdown, it started, and I wasn't listening in to him, but I also heard what he was saying. It became more of a caring community. So he would meet up online, have these stupid battles with his friends, but actually be like, hey, how are you doing? You know, I'm not feeling too good today. Why? And so they would have these really wholesome chats while trying to kill each other. And that online space for that community became so very, very important. And I know it's not only just for my son, it was for many people around the world. And that kind of positivity, and particularly in games when a lot we only hear about is negativity from the online communities, I think that was something that industry did right. And yeah, that's a really good example from my point of view of a positive community.
Yeah, I think we've definitely seen a lot of that during the pandemic as well, with the whole Play Apart Together initiative and lots of people playing games for communities, spend time with their friends, using it to support their mental health. So all that has been really rewarding to see. Did you notice any differences in play during the pandemic, Tim, out of curiosity?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think everybody rode a pretty exciting wave during COVID. A lot of people were at home playing video games. So it was a great opportunity for many of us. And the one thing I wanted to highlight as far as the potential benefit outside of the actual immediate player experience is the opportunity for the developer yourself to show some vulnerability and transparency to your audience. Because many players these days are looking for much more than just like a distraction in their game. Like they're looking for something in many cases to believe in, to belong to. And this goes back to what we've been talking about with values as well. If you clearly state those and you hold up to them, then there's more reasons for people to want to continue to spend their time and their money with you, and then to tell their friends about you as well. Like they become part of their identity, part of their lifestyle, and that leads to sort of the organic growth that a lot of us independent developers really rely on. If we don't have huge brands or huge marketing budgets to grow our games, I really felt very strongly about that with my previous company, which we were just a tiny team in New Zealand, and we had to stay true to that value, had to find that niche little set of players, even though we didn't have the hugest audience in the world. The audience that we did have really cared about us because we put our faces on screen, we talked to them frequently, and we were not afraid to also own up to our mistakes. And that makes you feel even more human. And because we're all, of course, flawed, we're all going to mess it up. But then it becomes part of the story. And then you're bringing them along for the ride. So I think, I think I've said this a few times now, but you can never get it right at the start. It's all part of the fun, iterating on it with the audience just in real time.
Yeah, so I already talked about how the player community really embraced this project that we made, and another interesting benefit of these projects were not just in the gaming community, but inside the dev companies themselves. So that was an interesting thing to see how these things were super inspiring for people who worked on this project. They had a chance to dig into a completely different domain. They had the chance to interact with really high-profile researchers in the field, whether it's human microbiome research or exoplanet research. And the other effect was also interesting, that it resonated really well with new talent. So when these companies went to universities, for example, to look out for new talent, this was something where they can say, hey guys, it's us who made this project, and that resonated with a completely different talent pool. That was also a very interesting benefit of these projects.
Yeah. Thank you.
I can just add really quickly to that as well, because this is a massive retention issue. For those of you who have a team or are looking to hire, people are coming to games, partly to work in games, I should say, partly because they want to see their values reflected in the work that they do. And if you're not able to show that you are authentically holding those values and holding space for those values, then a lot of people are going to move on. They're going to look for a company that is doing that, or they might be looking over their shoulder at a company that's doing a better job of that. So, should we do this for the betterment of humanity? Yes, we should. But also, if you're interested in retention and hiring top talent, this is a key issue for the next generation of talent.
Okay, so if a studio developer wanted to start prioritizing digital thrive and community resilience, where would they even begin? Like, what's one thing they could do to start?
I'm going to say the really obvious thing, that you can come join the Fair Play Alliance. We, our mandate is equitable access to best practices. So wherever you are in the world, wherever you are in your journey to digital thriving, we're here to help. And we will do so free of charge. Like, we are literally just here to help companies usher in this change. So if you're looking to make change, if you're not even sure where to start, come talk to me or any of our team, and we will definitely support you.
Anyone else?
I mean, we also have some workshops, and we'll also redirect you back towards the Fair Play Alliance. I'm really excited about some of the resources they have coming out. A lot of the work that we do helps you figure out some of the, getting a better understanding of like the current landscape of the things that are getting in the way of building for that thriving, so that you have a solid kind of base upon which to build.
Thank you.
Throw out there as well, like reach out to us. Just talk to us, because we've made so many mistakes and we'll continue to make mistakes, and you can learn from them. Or if it's not us, like someone that you admire. The games industry is wonderful in how accessible everybody is. So you can probably find them here and just go and chat to them, because everyone's lovely. Yeah.
Thank you. Charlie, Attila?
Yeah, it's the same here. So reach out to us too. What we are doing, basically, we are acting as an intermediary between scientific research and video game companies, and I really hope that more and more game companies will jump on board and start projects like these.
Last but certainly not least.
Yeah, you can reach out to me too, but I don't know how much use I'll be. But yeah, I mean, look at the ecosystem that you're building, and look at it with as unbiased eyes as you possibly can, and see how that is growing and building, and see if there are pain points, if there are issues that are up and coming. If you're working in terms of diversity, try and have people involved, cultural sensitivity experts, or diversity when you're looking at different neurodivergencies, accessibility factors. So putting all of these things in place makes a community stronger and happier and healthier. And like, going back to the point that was said earlier, so enriching, nourishing, nurturing. It's a growing, living ecosystem that you need to constantly prune. Not prune, that's the wrong word. Don't prune your people. It's
been a long day.
It's been a very long day. All I've got in my head now is bonsai trees. It's like a lovely bonsai tree. You need to keep trimming it and growing it and looking after it. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. So I guess at this point, we've had this long, sprawling conversation covering a whole number of topics related to digital thriving. what are your final takeaways? I know we've started with a few that we wanted people to come away with, but are there any new ones or any ones you want to restate?
I want to add like a little bit of a twist on mine, which was like that you need to start this early, pulling into some of what several people have said about values. One of the sticking points that people often run into is like, well, I care about this, but the people making the decision about where the money goes only care about money. And I hope that they don't only care about money, but if you do need to make those money arguments, it's actually pretty easy once you start to dig into some of the operational pieces. And again, the workshop this morning did a great job around that, but thinking about like, how do I take my values to actual goals, and how do I take those goals and talk about how those might impact the like financial health of the organization? How might that impact whether or not players stay around, how we get more players? So even if you don't care about the money, thinking about your goals, you can usually tie them into goals that also make money.
Yeah, I'll back that up as well. And just add into that as well, I know I've said it a bunch of times, but be prepared to iterate on these things because they're really, really hard. And it's one of the hardest things to plan for is that iteration time, because we all just think, okay, we're going to ship this thing and it's going to be great. And maybe parts of it will be great, but many things will need adjustment. So yeah, I think that's probably the most important thing, to be very generous with your iteration time.
And if we could quickly go through the last three, because I think we're running out of time.
Yeah, I'll just say, same thing. Bring these things up front. The work that we're doing here doesn't need to be in conflict with traditional game work. It's really rethinking how we bring these up front and include these from design at the very beginning. And these do tend to generate better outcomes, higher engagement. When you feel safe, when you feel secure, when you feel represented in a space, you're going to hang out there and you're going to invite all your friends too.
Well, no, go ahead. Go ahead.
So the gaming industry grew to be very powerful. And in my books, powerful primarily means responsibility. And that there's a lot of things that we have to be responsible about. But I think one of those things is to continuously work on trying to find new creative ways to extract value from all this time that we spend in games, all this brain power that we spend in games as players.
Yeah, I mean, I completely disagree with everyone on the panel. No, I mean, obviously everyone said it far more eloquently than me, but put the work in. Like I said, an unbiased eye, look at what you're doing, look at how it could be improved, talk to other people, learn from other people, look at your journey and the way that it's going and the community that you're building. Is there something lacking? Do you feel there's something you could be doing more? But do it with, do it with an open heart, right? Why are you doing this? Is it just to get money? Then it's maybe not the right idea. But is it to build a better community? And with that community will come money, will come success, ponies, glory, all of that kind of thing. But an open heart, I think, is my key takeaway.
Thank you very much. I think we're just about out of time. So thank you all for coming. And if you have questions, we'll be at the Fair Play party afterwards. So happy to answer questions there. Thank you again.